Hello, I'm going to read the third part of Ice Palace by Robert Swindells. This is where we left the story last time, where Ivan has just joined the dance with the village children. Round and round and round. The people of the village had stopped their dancing now and were crowding forward to watch the children. And as they watched, they clapped their hands to the fast, clever rhythm. The boy beside Ivan grinned, winked at him, and leapt into the centre. The child whose dance was done took Ivan's hand. The circle never stopped spinning. "My dance next," cried Ivan. "A few more moments and I will show you dancing." They whirled on. Ivan gasped as a volley of wind whipped about his legs, unimaginably cold. It scooped up a twist of crystals and spun them about his body. In an instant he was blinded as the stinging powder lashed his eyes. He tore his hands from those of his friends and fell to the ground, clawing at his face. The crystals turned to water and he blinked them from his eyes. He had broken the circle. He must get up and take his place, or the dance would be spoiled. Already the fiddlers had stopped playing. He scrambled to his knees and cried out in pain and disbelief. The fire was gone. There was no ring of children, nor any mark upon the snow where they had been. There were no villagers. The houses lay cold and broken along the empty street. Snow sifted through sagging doors, and the wind moaned in sightless windows, stirring here and there a rag of ancient curtain. He knelt there in the snow and wept for the pretty phantoms of the dance, his tears becoming ice upon his cheek. And when at last the crying stopped, so that he could see again, he saw before him a great black hole in the place where the fiddlers had been. A well, a deep, deep well, with smooth sides and black, icy water far down in the bottom of it. And he knew that if his turn had come to dance, then that black water would have closed forever over his head. He got to his feet shuddering, backing away from the well. Was it possible? They had been so beautiful. They had befriended him and made him one of them. Would they have led him to the brink of the well? Would they have let him fall? He stood there, forlorn in the broken village. The wind blew round him, and there was laughter in it, and he knew. He turned and ran along the silent street that had no footprint on it but his own, past the last house, and out onto the moon-washed slope. His feet sank into the snow, and his lungs were bursting, but he did not stop until he had topped the slope and plunged deep among the black pines. There he found a snowdrift, burrowed into it, and cried softly till sleep came. He set out the next morning weary and sad. He felt even more lonely than before. It seemed to him that he had no friend in the world. There were only enemies out here in the wilderness. His bread was almost gone. There was one piece left, but he dared not eat it, for he did not know how much further he had to go. He had not walked far when, turning to look back, he saw something moving far away between the snow-laden trees. At first it looked like a whirl of snow crystals whipped up by the wind. But as it came closer, he saw that it was an old woman in a grey, sparkling shawl which flapped about her as she came. He waited. The old woman came slowly, bending down now and then to pick something up from the snow. When she came nearer, she straightened up, gazing at Ivan. Strands of her hair whipped across her face like sleet, but she was smiling. Ivan took off his mitten, put his hand into his pocket, and pulled out a crust of bread. He held it out to her. "Old woman," he said, "it is cold, and you must be far from your home. Share my bread. It will warm you a little, perhaps." The old woman shook her head. "You are kind," she said gently, "but I do not need your bread." Ivan did not understand. "Old woman," he said, "what did you do when it was night and the wind howled like a hungry wolf?" The old woman smiled. "You are a good boy to take care about an old woman like me. But I am not an old woman always. Sometimes I am an icicle, or a bear, or a spruce tree. Sometimes I am a twist of wind-blown snow, colder than the night." Her eyes twinkled at him. "One night," she said, "I was a snowy owl." Ivan stared, remembering how he had been lost and freezing in the night. "Why, you," he said, "the owl who showed me the way? And the bear who drove off the wolves? And the little fir tree in the crack?" The old woman smiled. "It may well be so," she said, "for lovers find small miracles, no matter what men say, and no one ever loved better than you love your brother." "How do you know of this?" cried Ivan. "And what is it that you pick up from the snow?" The old woman held out her hand to him. Pips of ice lay like diamonds in her palm. "These are the tears that you cried for your brother," she said. "I have followed you, gathering them from the snow, because you will need them soon." Ivan frowned. "What would I do with tears?" he said. "Why will I need them soon?" "To soften Starjak's heart," replied the old woman. "Here, take them." And she tipped the icy pips into Ivan's hand. Ivan gazed at them. "I do not understand," he said. "What am I to do with these tears?" The old woman became grave. "At the moment of your greatest danger," she said, "you must fling the tears into Starjak's face and say, 'Brothers never more shall part, melt the winter in his heart.'" Ivan said the words softly to himself so that he would remember, and the old woman nodded. "That is right," she said. "And now go, for I can help you no more." When he had gone a little way, Ivan turned to wave farewell. But there was only a little spruce tree that quivered in the wind. He turned and walked on, and after a long time he came to a mountain. It was a hard white mountain, and as he drew near, the air grew colder still. At the foot of the mountain was a great high cave with the wind booming in its mouth. Ivan shuddered because he knew that he had come at last to Starjak's land. Inside the cave, it was utterly black. The roar of the wind was deafening, and it was deadly cold. Ivan stopped. The darkness filled him with dread. He looked back to where grey light spilled a little way into the entrance. He could go no further, must get outside to where he could see the sky and the snow and the trees. But his brother must have passed this way. Somewhere in this terrible place, the little boy was waiting for Ivan to come and take him home. He set his lips in a thin, firm line and moved on into the blackness, holding out his arms before him and going very slowly. The wind howled in his ears, and he heard again the laughing voice in it. Something fluttered in his face. He struck at it with his hand, and it slid up over his forehead and became tangled in his parka, dragging the hood from his head. At once something else hit him, flapping coldly in his hair. Ivan cried out, clawing the thing from his head. It sank needle teeth into his finger and whirled away on the wind. Another one, this time on his chest. He threw up his arms to protect his face. Whatever the things were, they were all around him. He felt the small collisions, felt them cling, fluttering to his clothing. He screamed, but the wind drowned the cry. He whirled round and round, beating at himself to knock them off, and for every one he brushed away, there was another one to take its place. He knew that it was hopeless. He put his head down, wrapped his arms around it, and went through them, and after a time the collisions stopped. For a long time Ivan moved onward through the cold darkness. The sound of the wind began to fade, and when he looked back he could no longer see the light. As he walked, he noticed that the tunnel was becoming higher and wider, and he seemed to be moving toward a lighted place. Presently he stopped, listening intently. Somewhere in front of him he heard a laugh. It was not a pleasant laugh, like the laugh of someone who is enjoying a good joke. It was a cold, flat laugh, and when it came again, Ivan found himself thinking about the laughter he had heard in the wind last night when he was lost and freezing. As he moved on, the laughter grew louder, and he could hear other sounds too. A swishing noise, and now and then a thin, high scream. The tunnel, which by now was wide and very high, took a sudden turn. The sounds seemed to be coming from just beyond the turn. Ivan flattened himself against the wall, peered cautiously round, and almost cried out. He was looking into a great glittering cavern. The floor was blue ice, and enormous icicles hung in thousands from the roof. Hard blue light glowed and flickered like cold fire, and the wind from the passage moaned around the walls. In the centre of the cavern, its back toward the boy, stood a hideous figure. It was stooped and crooked, and its white robe hung in folds from a bony frame. In one hand it gripped a thin, springy rod, of the kind which Ivan's people used to fish for trout in the river. As Ivan watched, the figure turned, pulling on the rod, and watching something that fluttered and squealed far up near the roof among the icicles. It was then that Ivan saw what the man was doing, and his heart turned cold. Fishing! The creature was fishing, but not in the water and not for fish. He was fishing in the air, and his victim was a tiny bat that whirled and tugged frantically as the man began to wind in the thin line. But struggle as it might, the poor creature was pulled closer and closer to its monstrous captor, and soon Ivan could see a streak of blood at its mouth from the cruel hook. When the terrified creature was close enough, the man clawed it out of the air, crushed it and dropped it onto the ice, where the broken bodies of several others lay. Then he threw back his head and laughed horribly.